They bullied my daughter during the science fair. But then a stranger walked in and changed her life. Her name was Grace. She was a shy girl who lived in a small town called Greenfield Hills. Grace wasn't popular, and she wasn't the smartest in class either. But she had something special, her love for science. Ever since she was little, she dreamed of becoming an inventor, creating things that could change the world. Her eyes would sparkle with excitement whenever she talked about her experiments, and the joy she felt when she solved a difficult problem was like nothing else. Grace had always been different from the other kids. While most of her classmates spent their time playing games or gossiping about who was dating whom, Grace spent hours in her room, surrounded by books, gadgets, and pieces of equipment she'd collected. She wasn't good at making friends, but she didn't mind. Her passion for science made her happy, even if it made her seem a little strange to others. This year, Greenfield Hills Elementary School was holding its annual science fair, and Grace couldn't have been more excited. She had spent weeks working on her project, an invention that could help reduce energy waste in homes. It wasn't the most exciting project, but to her it was a masterpiece. She had worked hard on it, and she was determined to present it to the judges with confidence. But things didn't go as planned. The day of the science fair arrived, and Grace was ready. She carefully set up her project on the table in the gym, arranging her materials just the way she wanted. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one that made her feel like she could conquer anything. Her mother had helped her with the finishing touches, and she could tell Grace was nervous but excited. The gym was filled with students, their projects scattered across the tables. Some had elaborate displays, while others had simple ones. Grace felt a little out of place, but she reminded herself that this was her chance to shine. As she glanced around the room, she saw some familiar faces, but there was one person in particular she couldn't ignore: Jenna. Jenna was one of the most popular girls in school. She had everything: looks, charm, and the ability to make everyone laugh. But she also had a cruel side. Grace had never been able to stand up to Jenna, mostly because Jenna seemed to enjoy making her feel small. Today was no different. As the fair began, Grace noticed Jenna and her friends laughing behind her back. They weren't being subtle about it, either. Grace could hear them snickering as they walked past her project. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the judges who were making their way through the rows of displays. But then, Jenna came over to her table with a smug smile on her face. "Wow, Grace," Jenna said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A house energy saver? How original. I bet no one's ever thought of that before." Her friends Amanda and Kelsey burst out laughing. Grace's face turned red, and she felt the sting of their words. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. She looked down at her project, feeling embarrassed. "Why don't you try something a little more fun next time?" Jenna said with a wink, turning to walk away. Her friends followed her, still laughing. Grace stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She had worked so hard on this project, and here she was, being made fun of in front of everyone. She felt small, invisible, and humiliated. But just as she was about to turn away, something unexpected happened. A tall man with a kind face walked into the gym, looking around curiously. He was wearing a black jacket and glasses, his hair a little messy like he hadn't bothered to comb it. He didn't look like a teacher or a parent, so Grace wondered who he was. He caught sight of Jenna and her group laughing and sneering at the students, and his eyes narrowed. Without a word, he walked straight toward Jenna and her friends, his steps purposeful. Grace couldn't believe it. The man stopped right in front of them, and Jenna, who had been laughing just a moment before, suddenly fell silent. The entire gym seemed to hold its breath. The man spoke in a calm but firm voice. "I don't appreciate people making fun of others, especially when they're trying their best. You should be ashamed of yourselves." Jenna's face went pale, and she tried to brush it off. "What are you talking about? We're just having fun." "No," the man said, shaking his head. "This isn't fun. This is bullying, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen." For a moment there was silence. Grace watched as Jenna and her friends exchanged uneasy glances. They had never been confronted like this before. The man turned to Grace, his eyes softening. "You should be proud of your work, young lady," he said to Grace, smiling warmly. "You've put in the effort, and that's something to be celebrated." Grace blinked, unsure of what was happening. The man was standing up for her, defending her when no one else had. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel so alone. But then, as if the man's words had triggered something, the unexpected happened. "Who do you think you are?" Jenna snapped, stepping forward, her voice laced with venom. "You can't just walk in here and talk to us like that. We're not afraid of you." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to grow colder. "I'm someone who believes in standing up for what's right," he said simply. "And I'm not going to let you or anyone else treat others like that." The atmosphere in the gym shifted. People had stopped what they were doing, watching the confrontation unfold. Grace's heart raced. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Jenna, who had always been the one to bully others, was being put in her place by a stranger who didn't even know Grace, but was willing to stand up for her. Jenna's friends were silent, unsure of how to react. Jenna, however, wasn't about to back down. She sneered and turned her back on the man, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Whatever, we'll see who's laughing in the end," she muttered as she walked away, her friends trailing behind her. Grace stood frozen in place, still processing everything that had just happened. The man had come to her rescue, and now Jenna and her friends were leaving. She looked up at the stranger, who was now smiling at her. "You don't deserve to be treated like that," he said softly. "Keep doing your best, don't let people like that stop you." Grace's eyes widened. She felt like she was dreaming. Someone had finally stood up for her, and it was a complete stranger. But what was even more surprising was how much the man seemed to care. There was something about him, his calm demeanor, his kindness, that made Grace feel safe. "I don't know what to say," Grace whispered, feeling overwhelmed. "You don't have to say anything," the man replied with a smile. "Just keep believing in yourself." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Grace stood there, still in shock. The whole gym seemed to be buzzing with excitement, and she realized that the attention was no longer on her, not because of her project, but because of what had just happened. She wasn't the target anymore. The bullying had stopped, at least for now, but deep down, Grace knew this wasn't over. Jenna and her friends wouldn't forget this. They never did, and that thought lingered in her mind as she watched the man disappear into the crowd. Little did she know, this encounter was just the beginning. The stranger had sparked something inside her, something she couldn't ignore. And as much as she appreciated his kindness, Grace knew she had to take control of her own story. There was more to this than just standing up to bullies. Grace's life was about to change, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Jenna, stand in her way, but that would come later. For now, she just had to find a way to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The day went on, but the weight of the stranger's words stayed with Grace, lingering in her mind. The rest of the science fair passed in a blur for Grace. She had tried to focus on her project, to finish it the way she had planned, but her mind kept drifting back to the stranger and what had happened. Jenna and her friends were nowhere to be seen after the confrontation, and that gave Grace a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. When the judges finally came around to her table, Grace was still shaken, but she did her best to explain her project. She told them about the energy-saving invention she had created, her voice a little more confident than it had been before. She even smiled when they asked questions, knowing that, despite everything, she was proud of her work. By the end of the day, she had received an honorable mention. It wasn't first place, but it felt like a victory in its own way. As she packed up her things, Grace couldn't help but think back to the stranger. Who was he? Why had he been so kind to her? And most importantly, why had he stood up to Jenna when no one else had? The next few days at school weren't much better. Grace went back to being invisible to most of her classmates, but there was a new energy about her. She wasn't the same shy girl she had been before. The stranger's words kept echoing in her mind. "Keep believing in yourself." It was strange, but it gave her the courage to ignore the whispers and the stares. She wasn't going to let Jenna's cruelty define her. But that didn't mean Jenna had forgotten. On Monday morning, when Grace walked into the cafeteria, she was met with a harsh laugh from Jenna. Her friends were sitting at their usual table, but this time, they weren't just gossiping or laughing for fun. They were glaring at Grace, their faces twisted into sneers. "Look who decided to show up," Jenna called out loudly, so everyone could hear. "The girl who thinks she's going to change the world with an energy-saving invention. How cute." Grace felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but this time, she didn't flinch. She took a deep breath and walked past their table without looking at them. The words didn't hurt as much anymore. They were just words, and Grace had learned that they didn't have the power to control her. But then, just as she thought she had escaped the worst of it, Jenna's voice rang out again. "Oh, and by the way," Jenna said, smirking, "you can thank your new hero for making you feel so special. I don't know what he's teaching you, but you're just a loser with a stupid little project." Grace's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected Jenna to bring up the stranger. She hadn't even told anyone about what had happened, but somehow, Jenna knew, and that made Grace feel vulnerable, in a way she couldn't explain. The last thing she wanted was for people to think she was trying to get attention or pity. But Grace wasn't going to let Jenna get to her. She sat down at her usual spot, her stomach in knots, but her resolve growing stronger. She wouldn't let this bully tear her down again. The bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, and Grace quickly gathered her things, rushing to her first class. She tried to focus on her work, but Jenna's words kept ringing in her ears. She couldn't help but feel a little shaken. Would the stranger really be able to help her again? Was she strong enough to stand up to Jenna on her own? But just as Grace was beginning to lose herself in the whirlwind of thoughts, something unexpected happened. It was after lunch, and Grace was heading back to her locker when she noticed someone standing in front of it. She froze. It was the man, the stranger from the science fair. He was leaning casually against the lockers, his arms crossed, looking like he belonged there. Grace's heart raced as she approached him cautiously. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. The man smiled at her, his warm eyes twinkling. "I told you to keep believing in yourself, didn't I?" he said, his voice calm. "Well, I meant it. I also meant what I said about bullies." Grace's confusion deepened. "But how do you know?" He cut her off gently. "I've been keeping an eye on you, Grace. I saw what Jenna did, and I can't just let it go." Before Grace could say anything, the man continued. "I know you've been through a lot, but I also know that you have something special inside of you. You don't need to hide from bullies like Jenna anymore." Grace's mind was racing. "But what can I do? She's so powerful. Everyone listens to her." The man looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. "You're more powerful than you think, and I'm here to help you unlock that power. But first, I need you to promise me something." Grace felt a surge of hope. "What?" "Promise me that you won't let people like Jenna control you. Promise me that you'll fight for yourself, even when it's hard." Grace nodded, feeling a sense of determination she hadn't felt in a long time. "I promise." The man smiled, proud of her. "Good. Now listen carefully. I'm not going to let you fight this battle alone. You're going to take back control, and I'll help you every step of the way. We're going to show Jenna that she can't get away with bullying anyone, especially you." Grace's heart swelled with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a true ally. Someone who cared about her, someone who was willing to help her stand up to Jenna and her friends. The man's words gave her the courage she had been searching for. But even as Grace felt a sense of hope, a dark thought crept into her mind. What would Jenna do if she found out what was really happening? Would she be even more ruthless? Before Grace could ask any more questions, the man patted her on the shoulder. "You'll see, just trust me. Things are about to get interesting." He turned and walked away, leaving Grace standing there, her thoughts swirling. One thing was clear, this wasn't over. The man had given her the strength to face her fears, but now she had to figure out how to make it all work. Grace knew she couldn't back down now. She had promised herself, and the stranger, that she would stand up for what was right. But she also knew one thing: revenge was coming, and it would be far more satisfying than anything Jenna had ever imagined. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Grace walked out of the school, her heart racing with anticipation. The battle wasn't over yet, it was just beginning. The next day at school, Grace felt an electric charge running through her. The conversation with the stranger had given her a sense of strength she hadn't known she was capable of. She no longer felt like the same scared girl who had been mocked and ridiculed by Jenna and her friends. She was ready to take charge. She was ready for a change. Grace had no idea what the man had meant when he said things were about to get interesting, but she was determined to find out. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said about standing up to Jenna. Grace knew it wouldn't be easy. Jenna was a force, and she had the whole school behind her. But if this stranger truly believed she had power, maybe it was time to believe in herself too. As Grace made her way to her first class, she noticed Jenna sitting with her friends, as usual, laughing and gossiping. The sight of them made Grace's heart race, but instead of shrinking back like she would have before, she took a deep breath and walked past them with her head held high. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to, but as she neared the door, she heard it, the familiar taunting voice that had haunted her for so long. "Grace, I didn't see you at the science fair." Jenna called out, her voice dripping with mockery. "Was that embarrassing, or are you just too ashamed to show your face?" The cruel words hit Grace like a slap, but she didn't react. She didn't let it show that they hurt. Instead, she simply walked into the classroom, ignoring Jenna's sneers. It was hard, but she knew it was the right thing to do. Throughout the day, the whispers and the glares didn't stop. Jenna and her friends made sure Grace knew they were watching her, making snide comments in the hallways, and even laughing behind her back in the cafeteria. But Grace stood tall, her resolve growing stronger with every passing minute. By the time school let out, Grace's heart was pounding. She had made it through the day without breaking, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. She had no idea what the stranger had planned, but she was ready for whatever was next. She was ready to face Jenna, ready to take her on. As Grace headed toward the exit, she spotted him again, the stranger. This time, he wasn't leaning against the lockers. He was standing by the door, waiting for her. "Grace," he said with a smile. "How did today go?" Grace felt a surge of relief at seeing him. For some reason, his presence made everything feel more manageable. It was tough. Jenna and her friends didn't stop, but I didn't let it bother me. I just kept going. The stranger nodded, clearly pleased. "That's exactly what you needed to do. I'm proud of you." Grace's cheeks flushed with gratitude. "But what happens next? I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." He looked at her with a knowing expression. "You're doing great, but now we need to make sure Jenna knows she can't keep getting away with this. You can't just ignore her anymore. You need to stand up to her, but on your terms. It's time for her to see that you're not the same person she used to pick on." Grace swallowed, unsure of how to proceed. "But how do I do that? I don't think I can do it alone." "You're not alone, Grace," the stranger said firmly. "I'll help you, but you need to trust me, and more importantly, you need to trust yourself." Grace nodded slowly, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She had come so far already. She couldn't back down now. The stranger's eyes twinkled with a mixture of mischief and encouragement. "Tonight, we'll make sure Jenna realizes that she's not in control anymore. The tables are about to turn, and when they do, she won't know what hit her." Grace couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement at his words. She wasn't sure exactly what was about to happen, but she trusted him. She trusted that he knew what he was doing. When she got home that evening, Grace found herself pacing back and forth in her room. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of uncertainty and anticipation. Was she ready for whatever the stranger had planned?
Nope.
Could she really face Jenna head-on?
Nope.
But as the night went on, a plan began to form in Grace's mind. She had to do something big, something that would shake Jenna to her core. It wasn't enough to simply ignore her anymore. Jenna had to understand that bullying wasn't going to work anymore. Grace's phone buzzed, and she jumped. It was a message from the stranger. "Meet me tomorrow afternoon after school. I have everything ready. We'll do this." Grace's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The next day at school, Grace's nerves were on edge. She couldn't stop thinking about the meeting with the stranger. What exactly was he going to do? How would this all play out? As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Grace's stomach flipped with both excitement and fear. She couldn't back out now. She had promised herself, and the stranger, that she would stand up for what was right. Grace made her way to the meeting spot, a quiet corner of the school's courtyard, where no one would be able to overhear them. When she arrived, she found the stranger waiting for her, a small smile on his face. "Are you ready?" he asked. Grace took a deep breath and nodded. "I think so." "Good," he said. "Now let's show Jenna just what happens when you mess with the wrong person." Grace's heart raced. The moment of truth had arrived. This was the beginning of her revenge.
Nope.
And she was about to take the first step toward changing everything. The stranger led Grace through the school courtyard, his steps deliberate and calm. Grace's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the far corner, where the light faded into shadow. This was where it was going to happen. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she didn't want to back out now. She was ready. As they reached the designated spot, the stranger turned to her and looked her straight in the eye. "This is where it starts. You've been strong, Grace. You've been through so much, and it's time to turn the tables. No one should ever treat you the way Jenna has." Grace nodded, her throat dry. "I'm ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good," the stranger said. "We'll need to set everything up. Jenna's going to be at the school library after school today. I've arranged for her to walk into something she won't expect." "What do you mean?" Grace asked, her curiosity piqued. "Follow me," the stranger said.
Oh?
"I'll show you." He led Grace to the library entrance, keeping out of sight. There was a group of students hanging out near the steps, laughing and talking loudly. The stranger didn't acknowledge them. Instead, he motioned for Grace to stay close. "Now listen carefully," he said. I've arranged for a little surprise for Jenna. You won't be doing anything directly. You just need to stay calm and let things play out." Grace's nerves surged. "What do I have to do?" The stranger smiled mysteriously. "Just be there. Trust me, this is going to work. But when Jenna walks in, I want you to walk in right after her. Act confident, like you belong. She needs to see that you're no longer the girl she can push around." Grace swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in her chest. Could she really pull this off? Could she really walk into that library like she wasn't afraid? "You'll be fine," the stranger assured her, his tone kind but firm. "Just stay focused." As they waited, Grace felt a strange calm settle over her. She had spent so many years letting Jenna's cruel words and taunts control her life. Today, all of that was going to change. After what seemed like an eternity, they saw Jenna approaching the library. She was laughing with her friends, completely unaware of the trap that had been set for her. Grace's heart raced as she looked at the stranger. "Now," he said quietly. Grace took a deep breath and stepped forward, following Jenna into the library. The stranger's words echoed in her mind. "Act confident, like you belong." Inside the library, the air was heavy with the scent of old books and quiet chatter. Jenna's laughter echoed off the walls as she walked deeper into the space, oblivious to the surprise waiting for her. Grace followed, her footsteps steady, though her stomach churned. As she passed through the aisles, she could see Jenna's friends scattered around, absorbed in their own conversations. Grace didn't let them see her fear. She kept her eyes on Jenna, determined to stay focused. And then it happened. Jenna turned a corner and froze. Grace saw what she saw, a giant banner that stretched across the library's main wall. It was bright, bold, and impossible to miss. It read, "The Science Fair winners, Grace Andrews." Grace's breath caught in her throat as she watched Jenna's face shift from confusion to fury. The banner had been arranged earlier by the stranger, who had somehow managed to sneak into the school and pull off this elaborate stunt. Jenna had been caught completely off guard. The moment Jenna saw her name, the weight of her own cruel behavior seemed to come crashing down. But Grace didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Jenna's face twisted in disbelief, then anger. "What the hell is this?" she shouted, drawing the attention of everyone in the library. Her friends stopped talking, and the room grew eerily quiet. Grace stood at the edge of the room, her heart pounding, but she held her ground. This was it. This was the moment when Jenna's cruelty finally caught up to her. "Grace? You?" Jenna spat, her voice dripping with venom. "This is a joke, right?" "No joke," Grace said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "I won the science fair."
"And you didn't even notice."
"You were too busy trying to put me down." Jenna stepped forward, her face red with anger. "This is all just fake," she sneered. "You didn't deserve it. I don't know how you managed to pull this off, but it's pathetic." The room was silent. All eyes were on them, and Grace felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. Jenna had tried to break her, but now it was clear, Grace was no longer the victim. The stranger, who had been hiding in the back of the library, emerged from the shadows. Jenna's eyes widened when she saw him, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely rattled. "Are you behind this?" she asked him, her voice trembling. The stranger smiled coolly. "I just helped Grace show everyone what happens when a bully meets someone who's had enough." Jenna's eyes flicked from the stranger to Grace, and for a brief moment, Grace saw something different in her fear. She had no power here. Not anymore. "You're pathetic, Jenna," Grace said softly. "You can't keep treating people like they're beneath you. I won this fair and square, and I won't let you bully me anymore." Jenna opened her mouth to say something, but then she closed it, unsure of how to respond. The once confident girl who had torn Grace down for so long now seemed small and fragile, standing there in front of everyone. Grace could feel the eyes of the students on her. They were watching her, waiting for her next move. Jenna had lost her grip. Grace had taken control. And for the first time, Grace felt powerful. She wasn't going to be anyone's punching bag ever again. "Are you done, Jenna?" Grace asked, her voice steady. Jenna glared at her, but there was no longer the same fire in her eyes. She didn't respond. Instead, she stormed out of the library, her friends trailing behind her in silence. Grace stood there for a moment, taking in the scene. The quiet buzz of whispers started to spread among the students, and she could hear them talking about what had just happened. Jenna had lost. Grace had won. The stranger approached her, a proud look on his face. "Well done, Grace. You took control." Grace smiled, the tension draining from her body. "I couldn't have done it without you." He nodded. "Sometimes, you just need someone to remind you of your strength. But you did all the hard work. This was your moment." As Grace walked out of the library, she realized something important. She wasn't just standing up to Jenna anymore. She was standing up for herself. She had taken back her power, and no one could take that away from her. But little did she know, this wasn't the end. There were still lessons to be learned, and the stranger had more in store for her than she could ever imagine. The next few days after the incident at the library felt like a blur. Grace was still walking on air, her confidence growing every time she thought back to that moment. Jenna had backed off, and Grace felt like she had won a battle, not just for herself, but for every person Jenna had ever tormented. The whole school had witnessed her standing up for herself, and in a way, they were standing with her. But despite her victory, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. The stranger had said that there was more to come, that she wasn't done learning. And while she had managed to silence Jenna, there was still a lingering unease in the pit of her stomach. What was next? Was this truly the end? One afternoon, Grace was walking home from school when she saw the stranger again. He was standing by the corner, waiting for her as if he had been expecting her. His face was calm, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made Grace hesitate. "Grace," he said, his voice steady but warm, "you've done well, but there's something important I need to show you. Something that will help you understand the true meaning of what's just happened." Grace stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. "What do you mean? What's going on?" He motioned for her to follow him. "I know you're still processing everything, but it's time to take the next step." She followed him, her curiosity growing stronger with each step. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the neighborhood fading away as they made their way toward a small park at the edge of town. It was quiet there, peaceful, but there was something about the stranger's presence that made her uneasy. They arrived at a bench under a large oak tree. The stranger sat down and gestured for Grace to join him. "Sit, Grace. Let's talk." Grace hesitated, but finally sat down beside him. "I don't understand. What's next?" "I thought we were done with Jenna." "We are," the stranger said with a nod. "But what you did wasn't just about Jenna. It was about understanding that true strength doesn't come from revenge. It comes from kindness, self-respect, and knowing when to walk away from negativity." Grace frowned. "But I stood up for myself." She needed to know she couldn't push me around anymore. "I agree," he said gently. "But there's a bigger picture here. Revenge is a powerful emotion, but it's not what defines us. We're defined by how we rise above the people who try to bring us down." Grace didn't know what to say. She had thought that her victory over Jenna had been the end of it all. She had wanted to get back at her, to show everyone that she was no longer weak. But now the stranger was telling her that there was something more to it. "I know this is hard to understand," the stranger continued, "but what you did for yourself was just the beginning. You took control of your life, but now you need to take control of your actions. Think about how Jenna got to the point where she treated you the way she did. Was it just because of who you are, or was it because of something inside of her?" Grace stared at the ground, processing his words. She had never really thought about it that way. She had always seen Jenna as the enemy, the one who had made her life miserable for so long. But the stranger was right. Jenna's cruelty had to come from somewhere. It wasn't just about Grace. It was about something deeper. "I don't know," Grace said quietly. "I never thought about it. I just wanted to make her stop." "And you did," the stranger said with a smile. "But the next step is learning how to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget what happened, but it means you stop carrying that anger with you. It means you choose peace over revenge." Grace's mind was racing. Could she forgive Jenna? Could she really let go of all the years of hurt and humiliation? It felt impossible, but maybe the stranger was right. Maybe holding on to that anger was keeping her from truly moving on. Before Grace could say anything, the stranger stood up. "I have one last thing for you," he said, his voice softening. "Tomorrow Jenna will come to you, and she'll apologize. She won't know what to say, but she'll apologize. And when she does, I want you to listen. and I want you to forgive her." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "What if I can't?" "You can't," the stranger said. "You've already forgiven yourself by standing up for who you are. Now you just have to let go of the past. That's how you take control." Grace nodded slowly, her mind still spinning. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but the thought of peace, of finally being free from the weight of all the hurt, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could do it. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him. The stranger gave her a reassuring smile. "You're welcome. And remember, this is your journey. No one else can walk it for you." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the fading light of the evening. Grace sat on the bench, staring at the empty space where he had been. She was alone now, but she didn't feel as afraid as she once had. She was stronger than she realized. The next day, Grace arrived at school with a sense of determination. The sun was shining brightly, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Jenna had stayed quiet for the past couple of days, avoiding Grace and keeping to her own group. But Grace knew it wouldn't last forever. Jenna was going to come to her, and when she did, Grace had to be ready. As the school day went on, Grace couldn't help but glance around the hallways, wondering when it would happen. She was nervous, but she knew the stranger was right. This was her chance to truly let go of the past. Finally, during lunch, it happened. Jenna approached Grace, her eyes downcast, and Grace could see the unease in her posture. Jenna stopped a few feet away, looking uncomfortable. "I need to talk to you," Jenna said, her voice quiet and uncertain. Grace took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, what is it?" Jenna hesitated, then finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Grace. I've been awful to you. I don't know why I treated you that way. But I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve it." Grace's heart skipped a beat. This was it. Jenna was apologizing. But there was no anger, no bitterness in her voice, only remorse. Grace took another deep breath. "Thank you for saying that, Jenna. I appreciate it. I forgive you." Jenna's eyes widened, and for the first time, Grace saw a real human side to her. "You do?" Grace nodded. "Yes. I'm not going to let the past hold me back anymore. I want peace." Jenna stood still for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Thanks, Grace. I didn't think you'd forgive me." Grace smiled softly. "It's not about forgetting. It's about moving forward." With that, Jenna turned and walked away, leaving Grace standing there, feeling lighter than she had in years. Grace had done it. She had forgiven, and in doing so, she had finally freed herself from the chains of her past. But as the bell rang to signal the end of lunch, Grace couldn't help but feel that this wasn't the end. The stranger's words echoed in her mind. "This is your journey." And there was still so much more to learn. Grace walked out of the cafeteria, her heart full of hope and anticipation. The path ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next.